The Electronic Frontiers Foundation is part of our panel, and she's going to talk about policing and technology in the new era, focusing on policies. Open you up, Lisa.
Great. So I think just to sort of lay the land for where this is going to go, I think this morning we heard from the chief about a lot of the benefits of these technologies, and I think we just had a really great collaborative conversation. So I'm going to be a bit of the Debbie Downer now about them and give sort of an overview of issues we see with surveillance technologies, focusing on some of them, and sort of reforms we might want to see. And I'm going to do this to be clear. As I mentioned, I'm based in California. I'm talking from a generally national level here. Where something is Kalamazoo specific that I know of, I'll say it. But, you know, for all of this, it's like all of these issues we find are broadly applicable. We've seen them time and time again in jurisdictions across the country. And even if it's something that's not happening here yet, it doesn't mean it won't happen here in the future. So it's really, really important for all of us to understand the risks and the potential sort of downsides of using this type of technology. So with that caveat in mind. So first I just kind of want to introduce what EFF is, because I'm coming on behalf of them, and I think you know, EFF is a digital rights organization. It's a nonprofit and defends civil liberties in the digital world. We do privacy, free expression, and innovation through impact litigation, policy analysis, grassroots activism, and technology development. So one important aspect of EFF's work, and my work specifically, is addressing the complex and ever-growing issues surrounding mass surveillance, emerging technologies, and policing. We're currently living in a brave new world of police surveillance capabilities, whether it's phone-based location tracking, ubiquitous video camera recording, collection of your biometric data, or police access to your smart devices. Across the country, we're seeing law enforcement agencies acquire privacy-invasive technologies and gain increased access to our data. And while new technology can, of course, aid in legitimate law enforcement needs, it's crucial that we balance those uses against the substantial risk to privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. So EFF works to shine a light on those various technologies. I'll sort of share some resources we have at the end of this. And we've also been pushing for legal and policy changes that help protect everyone's civil liberties and constitutional rights as the surveillance state continues to grow. We feel strongly about this work because the potential for misuse of technology is, frankly, alarming. If we, as a society, move too quickly to adopt these technologies without weighing the costs and benefits, and without implementing any protective measures, we risk normalizing a culture of constant surveillance, where our every action is recorded, often without our knowledge or consent. As citizens, we must ask ourselves, are we willing to trade our privacy for a perceived sense of safety? Are we comfortable with the idea that our daily lives could be subject to continuous monitoring with often very little oversight? And an addressing crime, something we all want to do. Is mass surveillance tech actually the best solution? Or are there other ways to do this that don't so severely harm our rights? So to help us think about these questions, I'd like to do sort of three things which I mentioned. First, I'm going to explain why and how mass surveillance in general, and again, largely speaking nationally, not saying any of those issues are particularly happening here, poses a threat to our privacy, to our civil liberties, and to effective policing and use of public resources. Next, I'm going to highlight and note some of the problems with a couple of significant policing technologies, including ones that have been mentioned, used here in Kalamazoo. And finally, I'm going to give a few thoughts on the way forward. There are a number of potential policy and legal reforms, which I believe might be discussed in more depth tomorrow. But sort of as a preview, I want to provide some initial thoughts and guiding principles. What should we be mindful of as we move forward into this increasingly uncharted technological landscape? So, to start, why do we care about this? We'll hear a lot, as we heard this morning, about the important potential for these technologies to solve crime. But what are the downsides? So the threats to privacy posed by surveillance technologies are enormous. Law enforcement agencies at all levels of government across the US have started using surveillance technologies to compile vast databases filled with our personal information, to gather photos and videos of us as we move about the world, and to gain access to our devices, which contain so much personal information that they can lay bare the intricacies of our daily lives. National, state, and local laws have really yet to catch up with the evolving need for privacy and civil liberties protections that come with these new digital technologies, leaving us oftentimes without necessary guardrails on how and when this information is collected. I think it's important to remember that systems of mass surveillance collect data about you whether or not you've committed a crime. Many technologies, like, say, surveillance cameras or license plate reader cameras, collect information pretty indiscriminately. And anytime you walk or drive past the surveillance camera, it's recording your presence, your location, who you're with, and potentially even where you're going. This could include medical clinics, including reproductive health clinics. It could include houses of worship, protests, or gun shows. And only a tiny fraction of the data that's indiscriminately collected will ever be used to aid in an actual crime. Solving. Without any limiting policies, this data could be stored for months, years, or even indefinitely. And I was happy to hear this morning about sort of the data retention policies in place here. At the same time, the tech, like all technology, can be error-prone. Facial recognition software, as we talked about, has already an infamous history of misidentifying people. Yet it's easy for all of us, I think we talked about this already as well, law enforcement included, to treat technology as if it's, almost magic, something smarter than us. This leads to a real risk that police will over-rely on the tech, assume it's always correct, and not adequately supplement and confirm their own separate investigatory work. There are also tendencies for law enforcement agencies to deploy surveillance technologies disproportionately against marginalized communities. This can lead to over-surveillance and over-policing of certain neighborhoods and demographics. In the same vein, some of the policing technologies themselves can also exacerbate existing biases in the system. One example of this is something called predictive policing, in which law enforcement relies on outputs from an algorithm to attempt to predict future crimes. This, in turn, guides police procedure, where they patrol, and even who they might put under increased surveillance. But predictive policing, I think I will here. It's often a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's one that can reflect long-standing systemic inequalities. If police have historically always focused their efforts in certain neighborhoods, the data may reflect those areas as hotbeds of criminal activity, leading the algorithm to deploy more officers there. The system can aggravate existing patterns of policing, especially in neighborhoods with concentrations of people of color, unhoused individuals, and immigrants, by using the cloak of scientific legitimacy and supposed unbiased nature of data. Use of these surveillance technologies can also infringe on our constitutional rights, including our right to speak and associate freely under the First Amendment, or to be free from unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. We'll have deeper discussions about those legal issues during the afternoon breakout sessions, so I won't say more here. Another problem with mass surveillance, it's often done in secret. Law enforcement use of technology is in many jurisdictions, most jurisdictions probably, largely a black box. I know, Chief Boyson mentioned that Kalamazoo aims to include info about the tech in public press releases, and that's really great to always hear an emphasis on transparency. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that none of those efforts to maintain transparency are guaranteed unless you enshrine them in law. Whoever's in charge can always change. Policies can change. Priorities can change. And so, unless a jurisdiction implements transparency and oversight requirements, the public and sometimes even government officials and the courts have no guaranteed way of knowing how, when, and in what ways various surveillance technologies are being used. Secrecy also, we've kind of talked about this already, it can damage the constitutional rights of criminal defendants. Surveillance technologies are used at every step in the criminal investigation process, from generating leads to filing charges. If defendants and their attorneys don't have adequate information about the technology used at each step or information about how that technology was used, it's much harder time assessing whether it was used in a way that could have led to significant or exculpatory errors. Lack of transparency and oversight also increases the risk of misuse by rogue officers or bad actors. This isn't hypothetical. There have been stories from around the country of officers abusing these systems for inappropriate reasons. Even just I think last month, there was a story of a Kansas police chief who was found to be using the city's license plate camera system to track his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend's vehicles 228 times over the course of 4 months. So, as agencies adopt more technologies and collect and hold on to more troves of data, there's obviously even more opportunity for abuse. Lack of oversight can also lead to mission creep. For example, while an agency may initially acquire video surveillance drones to respond to extreme public safety emergencies or to aid in things like search and rescue operations, without strict usage policies or oversight, that agency may start using the drones more frequently, including, and as we have seen in cities across the country, at First Amendment protected events like protests. We've seen similar mission creep with a technology called Cell Site Simulator. It's an extremely privacy-invasive location tracking tool that basically masquerades as a cell phone tower, tricking phones within a certain radius to connect to it instead of the actual tower. And so, there was one investigation in Maryland into their use of this technology, and it had been initially adopted for things like terrorism. And it had gotten, the practice in use had become so widespread that law enforcement had used it in a case involving just theft of chickens. So you'll see just real growth and expanding use of these technologies without limits on that. Keep in mind the security procedures, the privacy policies, and everything that both law enforcement and these third parties are doing to keep your data safe. And I think, this is on the CPB hack, which I mentioned during the panel. Really bad. People's private information ended up online. So then I think, finally, it's important to ask whether these technologies are worth our public resources and taxpayer dollars. For each individual one, we should be assessing this. Law enforcement agencies at the state, federal, and local level are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on surveillance technology in order to track, locate, watch, and listen to people in the US. There's a thriving industry made up of private vendors, including some police tech like mega companies, and then government buyers. And because selling police surveillance tech is so lucrative, an economy is propped up in certain jurisdictions of shady and unregulated kickback schemes. Under these arrangements, police in some of these jurisdictions have received economic incentives to promote the adoption of certain surveillance equipment in their own jurisdiction to the people that they should be protecting, and even to other towns, states, and countries. This has been happening for over a decade. This is a really prominent story as Microsoft developed a sweeping citywide surveillance system, domain awareness systems, for the New York City Police Department, which cost $30 million. Its formal unveiling in 2012 led Microsoft to receive a slew of requests to buy the technology from other cities. Subsequently, according to the New York Times, the NYPD started to receive 30% of gross revenues from the sale of the system and access to any innovations developed for new customers. This leads to a disturbing question that undergirds many of these public-private surveillance partnerships, and something that we should be constantly asking. Does our society, our community, actually need this much surveillance, or are the police just profiting off its proliferation? So these are sort of some high-level issues we've seen around the country. I'm going to turn now to a few specific technologies, but I think it's important to sort of keep those risks in mind as we talk about the technologies and some of the potential paths forward. So frankly, there are simply too many police surveillance technologies to discuss in depth at the time we have. So at the end of this presentation, I'll show you where to access the FF's street-level surveillance hub, which you can visit to learn more about additional technologies.
But right now, I'm going to highlight only a few significant ones, including a few that I think are maybe relevant here in Michigan or in Kalamazoo. So first, face recognition. We've kind of talked about a lot already, so I can maybe move a little faster on this. You can see from this map that it is all over Michigan, though apparently not here in Kalamazoo. Many police agencies use face recognition in routine patrolling and policing. It's a biometric technology. It uses the face or the image of a face to try to identify an individual. It can be deployed in multiple ways, including on workstations, on mobile devices for field use, or through security cameras positioned in public spaces. And face recognition depends on there being massive databases of images of people to train the underlying algorithms. Law enforcement can query these databases to try and ID people in photos taken from social media, from CCTV cameras, traffic cameras, or photographs officers have taken themselves in the field. It can be used in coordination with other surveillance technologies and databases to create profiles of individuals, including those who may have never been involved in a crime. As it becomes more widespread, it diminishes our ability to move through public spaces without being identified. This loss of anonymity can impact our privacy, our social interactions, and our freedom of expression. It's also been shown to be inaccurate and racially biased. The software is particularly bad at recognizing people of color, women, young people, and transgender and non-binary individuals. Being misidentified by a face recognition system is a serious injury. It can result in unwarranted jail time, criminal records, expenses, trauma, and reputational harm. I think there's been some very public cases here in Michigan involving wrongful arrests, including Phil's case. I think he'll probably talk more about that in the afternoon session. So surveillance camera networks. I think surveillance cameras are probably the type of surveillance technology that we might be most familiar with. It's the most common, recognizable, and they watch us as we move about our daily lives. It's growing in sophistication. Some cameras are now capable of 360-degree video, infrared vision, or the ability to pan, tilt, and zoom. Some models can be equipped with real-time face recognition or license plate readers. And since many cameras are also connected directly to the internet, because they're monitored remotely, they've proven easy targets for hacks and malicious attacks. Both public agencies like law enforcement and private actors install surveillance camera networks, though the distinction between public and private control of cameras has blurred with the development of real-time crime centers. These are video monitoring headquarters, and they can be used to tap into both public and private camera feeds. I think we've talked about this a bunch here in the context of fuses. I think in a sort of quiet but rapid expansion of these centers, US cities, including Kalamazoo, are buying and promoting products from fuses in order to access on-demand live video from both public and private camera networks. The company sells a cloud-based platform for creating these real-time centers, and it also sells hardware that private citizens and businesses can add to their own surveillance cameras to convert their cameras into basically instantly accessible parts of the police surveillance network. So I think we kind of talked about fuses a lot. I think there's obviously benefits, but it's important to keep in mind just how much this expands the police surveillance network. Now it's not just police cameras or government cameras, it's everyone's cameras. And it's all concentrated in one place. Drones. So drones or unmanned aerial vehicles are remote controlled, sometimes autonomous devices that are equipped with cameras and other forms of surveillance technology. They can be equipped with myriad spying technologies, including high definition, live feed video cameras, thermal infrared video cameras, heat sensors, and devices that register Wi-Fi pings for cellular devices. I mean, not every drone will be, but it's possible. The technology is out there. Customs and Border Patrol is currently looking at drones equipped with facial recognition technology for patrolling the border. And Autonomous drones also collect a vast amount of data just to safely move about. So it's just troves of data being collected. They were originally used by military intelligence agencies, but are now regularly used by federal, state, local, all over the country, including here. In fact, I think Michigan was the first state to get statewide approval for police use of drones. I think that's correct. They are definitely a state. Drones are used for crime investigations and also a wide variety of other purposes, including some useful non-crime related things like building compliance inspections or search and rescue operations. But they can also be used for far more sinister activities like surveilling large gatherings and protests. I think something that we've found very concerning is there are increasing numbers of calls from police departments and drone manufacturers around the country to arm remote control drones. The drone manufacturer Axon paused a program in 2022 after widespread backlash, including resignations from their ethics board, because they had a program where they intended to develop a drone armed with a taser, supposedly to be deployed in school shooting scenarios. But remember our conversation about mission creep. We're likely to see more proposals like this, including drones armed with pepper spray and other crowd control weapons. And Axon itself, after halting this program, subsequently acquired a military drone company. So we'll see. I think just as a quick aside, we've seen similar and equally disturbing debates over arming police robots. I don't have all the time in the world to discuss this, but if you want to talk about it more, you can find me after. Definitely opposed to killer robots. License plate readers, another technology we've already talked about a lot today. So they're cameras. They automatically capture all vehicle license plate numbers that come into view, along with location, date, and time. I think most of the systems also collect photographs of the vehicle and sometimes its driver and passengers. And this is all uploaded then to a central server. These devices are typically mounted on street poles, highway overpasses, mobile trailers, or attached to police squad cars. And crucially, for agencies that don't want to invest in their own cameras, they can still get access to data because Flock and other license plate vendors make it just so easy to data share. Agencies just basically click a button and they can share with different law enforcement agencies all over the state and the country. And they can also share with private, I think homeowners associations often use ALPRs and share that information as well. So it's just a vast data network that's getting shared. And ALPRs, as I mentioned, collect this pretty indiscriminately, tracks the movements of millions of ordinary citizens who drive by them and who have no connection to any crime. It allows for rapid collection of thousands of license plates per minute. It's significantly expanding law enforcement's ability to track vehicle locations compared to traditional manual methods. And then I think I sort of touched on this in the panel. When you have a technology that can collect that much information, even when it's useful, it's really important to look at just how much of the data is actually being used in crime. So EFF studied this in California in 2021. So it could be different everywhere, and I think California has actually implemented a lot of license plate readers. But looking at 63 law enforcement agencies across California, only 0.05% of the data collected was relevant to a public safety interest at the time. So ALPRs are used all over the country. They have potential, to create permanent records virtually everywhere we drive. This, radically transforms what it means to leave the home as a private citizen. In most places in the US, you need a car to go about daily life. This means for many, many people, there's just no real or meaningful option to opt out of this surveillance. They also open up many opportunities for abuse. They allow users to search for historical travel patterns, users being either the law enforcement agency or the homeowners association, whoever has installed the system. They can look for specific locations, and rogue officers can and have, as I mentioned, use this to stalk ex-partners or for other inappropriate reasons. The data can also reveal sensitive information about individuals, like what I mentioned earlier already, whether you visited a health center, whether you went to a place of worship or a protest. And then I think worse, we've seen law enforcement agencies in some places use it to target marginalized communities. Police officers in New York, for example, drove down a street and electronically recorded the license plate numbers of everyone parked near a mosque. And EFF obtained ALPR data from Oakland that showed police disproportionately deployed the cameras in low-income communities and communities of color. Like with facial recognition, ALPR identification errors can lead to wrongful arrests and associated injuries. In one sort of prominent case from 2022 in North Carolina, they used an ALPR to mistakenly link Jacqueline McNeil to a shooting. Police released her after several hours of interrogation when they realized they had the wrong person, but not before they surrounded her in a parking lot and cuffed her as she was heading home for her goddaughter's funeral. In another recent instance in Aurora, Colorado, a mom and her children were traumatized after being forced out of their car, cuffed, and made to lie on the ground after an ALPR system mistakenly identified the car as stolen. And these mistakes cost the taxpayers money. They're suing, and then there are settlements. So it's costly for the people involved and for all of us. And I think sort of just to touch on some of the work I've done on ALPRs, because they track location, show the places you visit, and allow officers to easily share that data with agencies in different states, they pose other complicated privacy risks. For example, ALPR data sharing could enable prosecutions involving people who need to leave an abortion-restrictive state in order to receive reproductive health care across state lines. So imagine this with other types of laws as well. A group of us at EFF actually got more than 70 law enforcement agencies in California to stop sharing across state lines, partly for that reason. So what then? How do we balance law enforcement's desire to use these technologies to aid in criminal investigations against our privacy and civil liberties interests? I think I'll just touch on a few things at a high level before closing, because I think there will be more in-depth, specific policy discussions later. I think there's some overarching principles that can guide our approach. We need transparency about what is being used and adopted. We need to allow the public to have a say in how and whether technologies will be implemented. We also need independent oversight and accountability measures, which could include stronger privacy regulations, audit requirements, limitations on data storage, limitations on data sharing, and most importantly, limitations on when and how the technology can be used. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, but I think for the people in this room that are sort of interested in following this and tracking this and making sure that we like what's being implemented, there's some important questions we should be asking. So what data is being collected? Is it video? Is it audio? Is it biometrics? How and where is the data being collected? Where will the cameras be placed? Are they going to be placed in certain neighborhoods? Why were those neighborhoods chosen? How long is the data stored? When is it deleted? What are the deletion procedures? And what is the justification for the retention period? Some different technologies will need different times. What are the impacts on vulnerable communities? How will these potential harms be mitigated? And what are the defined purposes for when it may be accessed or searched? Is there a legal standard that guides this? Is AI involved? And I think really importantly, we talked about this a lot today, how are we measuring the technology's effectiveness? Are we measuring the technology's effectiveness? We'll sign contracts usually for maybe a couple years at a time. How are we deciding whether or not to renew those contracts? Who can access the system and data? Are there limitations on that? Is it any officer? Is it only set officers? Is it other government officials? Is there training? Are there audits? And are audit results provided to the public, or are they kept internal? Do we know what's going wrong when it goes wrong? Then I think we talked about this a lot as well. What is the company providing the tech? Have they experienced data breaches or unauthorized access? Cost, how much will it cost? How's it being funded? Who's funding it? And then what are the transparency mechanisms? What is the public going to find out? And what will be subject to public records laws? All of these are really important to keep in mind as you look at these. In some instances, it makes more sense to have an outright ban because the technology is just too dangerous. We've seen this in many jurisdictions with facial recognition technology and to a lesser extent, predictive policing technology. And as I mentioned, EFF and I strongly believe no jurisdiction should begin using armed drones or robots with weapons. Another thing to consider, I've been very policy, but I am a lawyer, warrant requirements. So the Fourth Amendment protects your privacy, requiring law enforcement to get a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search or seizure, which includes when they invade your reasonable expectation of privacy. Phil is going to spend far more time on the Fourth Amendment later, so you'll get a deeper understanding, but it's worth bearing in mind that this is a guardrail. This is a protection that's put in place. And say you had an ALPR, the license plate reader database, with a warrant requirement, an officer would have to have probable cause and state with particularity what they're looking for in order to go and search that database. So they couldn't just be legally searching it for any information they might find. Interesting. I think there's a 2018 Supreme Court case really sort of opened the door to this, though it's Carpenter. It was the case dealt very specifically with historical cell phone location tracking data over time, and it's not entirely clear how it will play out and apply to other future technologies, but it opened the door. And I think really also importantly confirmed the principle that you do actually have some expectation of privacy in public, even if it's diminished. It's a common myth that you don't, but in Carpenter, the location tracking is happening while they were in public. You have, and it was found to violate their reasonable expectation of privacy. This happens in part because surveillance technology makes it possible for so much data to be collected about you that it changed fundamentally what it means to go out in public. And then I think the final thing is you can also implement warrant requirements via statute. Just recently saw a Minnesota statute that did this for some parts of their ALPR system. So there's also been various initiatives aimed at enhancing oversight and accountability of police use of technology. I know this is obviously something important here in Kalamazoo. We've already been working on increased transparency and collaboration and oversight in other areas of criminal justice system. And I think a notable effort that's a common thing that we've been seeing that's had some success in various places across the country is community control over police surveillance, or CCOPS. CCOPS advocates for policies that require law enforcement agencies to disclose their surveillance practices to the public and obtain community input before implementing new technologies. CCOPS advocates for policies that require law enforcement agencies to disclose their surveillance practices to the public and obtain community input before implementing new technologies. The goal is to mandate that they do the things listed up here before any surveillance technology is adopted. We've seen them in some places, though admittedly successfully getting CCOPS implemented and implemented in a way that is effective and not overly watered down has been a bit of an uphill battle, but it has been happening, and it's a sort of great method of looking into developing a system for transparency and accountability. I think I mentioned this at the end of the panel, but there's also a number of other things that you as just an individual private citizen can do. Look for accountability measures buried in your state laws, locate technology use policies and audits, which you can often just find online, or you can use freedom of information laws to gather intel. And if this is something that's particularly interesting to anyone, we have an investigations team at EFF that is really good at this and always happy to talk to people and provide resources, so you can reach out to me. And that brings me to other EFF resources that I think are really interesting and useful. Our investigations team also manages the Atlas of Surveillance, where through open source records, freedom of information requests, news stories, They sort of compile and are maintaining a database of what law enforcement across the country is using, or at least we publicly know they're using. You can see search Kalamazoo and a whole bunch of different county and city agencies come up. So it's a place to go. It's not comprehensive because some of this stuff isn't public, but it does give you some information. So that's atlasofsurveillance.org. It's also just cool to look at. It's a map of the whole country here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's also our street-level surveillance hub. Each one of these little purple squares is a different surveillance technology. You can click on it, and it's got a description of how the technology works, sort of history of its use, issues with it, news stories, relevant cases. So if you're just interested in learning more about the technology that I wasn't able to talk about, it's a really good place to go. So yeah, and then thank you. This is my contact information. You can reach out to me if you have any questions at any point. It's also on the EFF website. But I also wanted to just close just a little more poetically. I want to reemphasize that the potential benefits of enhanced safety and crime prevention must be carefully weighed against the substantial risks to privacy, equity, and civil liberties. It is our collective responsibility, policymakers, law enforcement, and citizens, to foster an environment where technology serves the public good without compromising our fundamental rights. If we work together, which we're starting a process here, we can ensure that our approach to policing is guided not just by technological capability, but also by our commitment to justice and the protection of individual freedom. Thank you.